the annual plan 26-27. So what we are looking at currently is a 9.36% increase, which after growth is 7.36. So that is below the LTP expectation of 7.5% in year 2, the long-term plan. What we do have to let you know is, should I recap? Should I go back?
No, you're right. Keep going.
Just recap those numbers again, just for Kirsten.
So annual plan 26-27. What we're looking at right now is a 9.36% increase. After growth, that is 7.36%. And that is below the LTP prediction or forecast of 7.5% for year 2. Rating examples are not ready yet, so they can't be provided until June because of the revaluation process that is going to take place. So if we gave you some rating examples now or in March, they actually would change by June anyway, so it wouldn't make any sense to provide those. And what we really want to get from you guys is whether you had any feedback from your Christmas and New Year reading of the draft annual plan before we move on any further.
3% is pretty good, eh?
Do you want an update on that number? We've got better news for you.
Right?
Wait, what?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Oh, just get those slide numbers.
Well, you can't tell them it's 9.36 and then hit them with another number. Just give them the number.
So I think what we did was at the December period, we provided with your annual plan version. Now that has slightly changed to what the current version is, and that's due to the fact that we completed a second forecast for this financial year. And we did, as part of that process, is we looked at the capital program we are planning on delivering in this year and reassessing the timelines and where we think that the projects will continue into the next year. Those projects then allowed us to reassess some of the assumptions we made when we created the first version of the annual plan. Assumptions around what the reserve balances will be, what the interest costs will be, what the borrowing will be. So reassess some of those things. And as part of that, we looked at that we aren't going to be funding as much depreciation because we won't be
Spending the money.
as much capital expenditure in this year. So that's dropping your funded depreciation. And again, we've already funding depreciation this year on projects which will continue into the next year. So that funding is still available. So we don't need to fund more. Similarly, the borrowing costs that we are also funding in this year, some of that borrowing will be uplifted next year. So we don't need to borrow. We don't need to fund as much as borrowing costs into the next year. What that does is it does affect the overall rates number. So currently, as Amelia said, prior to in December, it was sitting at 9.36%. Now it is sitting at 8.44%. So after adjustment for growth, it comes to 6.34% versus the LTP figure of 7.5.
I asked Peter if we could get something that started with a 6 and he said 0 chance. And he meant a percentage of a chance.
So
Fair in the punch out.
So-
Yeah.
Rich and me tells me that 6%. Okay, if we went back to 7.5, why can't we pay back more of the depreciation on the water? That's
Hey, could you flick 2 slides across?
oh,
And then we'll go back.
again.
Here's one for you.
I must have had a good sleep.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So that's what the rates number is at the moment. So what we've done is we recalculated what the interest cost is going to be for next year. We've re-looked at what depreciation expense will be for the next year based on programs we will deliver in this year and the subsequent changes to the funded depreciation as well. So there will be a paper that will be coming to council in February around those forecast changes, and there will be more detail around what projects are moving into the next year that will still continue along. If you go back to one slide, please, mate. We go to, so that's the biggest change that's coming through from forecast. is that there's around 17.2 million worth of capital expenditure, which we expect to continue into the next year from this year. So these are projects that were part of the first year of the LTP. They would carry forward from 24-25 financial year into this year, which are still expected to continue into the next year as well.
So that decision we made in the Cromwell meeting to deferring the depreciation, percentage of depreciation, we can't reverse that back to pay all that depreciation on water.
You
Because that
could,
took us from 13% rates or whatever down to 9%. But we're actually funding water. We're going to lose water. We're funding water out of debt and depreciation.
yeah, I guess in terms of the debt space for water, that would be transferred. So we're only funding, and as Gasaywicks explained, as we move capital projects push them forward into the future, that means that you're not borrowing as much. So our borrowing costs are down, which means that there'll be less that we transfer out to the new entity. That then becomes how the new entity deals with its capital program and how it wants to fund things and what level it wants to work with. What you could do, and again, this is the discussion point. We have an LTP number of 7.5. We're currently showing 6.3. So there's 1.2%. If you so desired, you could
Stay at 7.5.
you could go to 7.5 and say the difference is for debt repayment or something like that, and just start working on the debt. There's nothing in your budgets that you would need to effectively reinstate from the LTP. It's really just around effectively the financing side of it, the funded depreciation side. Made the decision in the LTP to reduce the funded depreciation side on the renewals for Three Waters. And we actually used some of the reserves as well. I think in Stormwater's case, we used some reserve space. Given that we've made that decision and it's got 1 year to travel, I think it's probably better to stick to that decision. The other thing that plays into this is the government's rates capping announcements and the fact that they're looking, they're monitoring now. There's nothing they can really sort of hit you with at the moment because there's no legislation in place, but they are watching. And I think it's potentially from a political side, it's a good thing to be able to announce a lower rates rise than you had predicted in the next year, given that it's the government have said, look, we're saying 4%, and councils are starting to move towards 4%. So I think all of those things come into play. But if you wanted to leave it at 7.5, then I would recommend that it goes to repaying.
Yeah. Well, I would be in that camp because really the growth component is the bit that's saving us, and we're going to have so much growth. And the real risk is we don't start doing stuff, we'll have an infrastructure in place. When the growth comes along, we'll be behind the eight ball and we'll have to borrow anyway. So we're going into a world environment, we're going to have cheaper interest rates, long term anyway, well, medium term. And if we do show back paying off debt, then it's the same thing as if we can show 1.5% debt or 1% debt payment. Won't be many councils in the world in New Zealand do that. So it's effectively the same as taking it off your rates.
Not found money. And 7.5% is not something that our community want to see. I think actually, no, the government has been really clear and our communities have been clear. They want to see that number coming down. So if we've found, if we get to the end and we've got 1.5% or 1.2% spare, it's not spare. Let's not say, oh, we've already told them it's 7.5, so we'll bump it up. No, our community wants to see that down.
Yeah, they might, but the same token, they also want the infrastructure, they also want the roads, they also want museums, and they also want those other things. Now, the government have come out and just made it mandatory, we was poking the stand. And then the first people to put regulations around it, they became inflationary, and that was Through Water. It's unrealistic to have any business now that has a 4% and try to maintain staff, maintain roads, maintain with insurance, power, all the infrastructure costs are going up. And if you start missing out, this community for the sake of 1%, now that still kicks me around a bit. But that last water, Curtis and I were just talking about that in Roading before, between the top price and the bottom price of that water presentation we had a couple of weeks ago, the difference between the top price and the bottom price is $7.2 million.
Julie.
I'm just, because it might influence thinking a bit here, Ed. If you were to put the water, the more money into capital in for water for next year, we couldn't deliver it. Like, we've already got a $13 million program for next year anyway, I think, plus another the $12 million carry forward. We would not be construction ready to bring that much work forward.
Yeah, but I guess
That's going to address,
It's
that's one of the things that we had the issue with last year was $19 million worth of carry forwards. Is the reforecasting going to address that?
the point I'm making, Julia, there is with quotes, and because the last contract went to Fulton Hogan and they met the everything, the difference between the contract price is greater than 1 or 2% on our rates. That $7 million represented about 12% of rates. So we actually haven't seen the good work that's starting to come through now, and we're talking about our road in our meeting just before. So if you took middle run through there could be $3 or $4 million of savings just in that, in the contracts we're doing now, just to the nature of what's happening in the industry. So you take $3 million out, there's what?
Okay. In answer to that and following really on what Julie said, we are not, we budgeted $138 million in borrowing for this year. We're estimating it's going to be 100 million. And that's partly because of what you can see up there. We also have most of our borrowing either sits in the Three Waters space or the Cromwell Hall space. Now, you guys made a resolution to fund the Cromwell Hall debt from land sales. So if you take that bit out, you're then sitting with effective Three Waters debt. And what you're then saying is that, well, what we're saying is that that Three Waters debt is lower than we'd anticipated. That is going to shift over to a new entity for them to make whatever decisions they want to make. To get it down to this, what you could do, if the council was keen to not utilise the extra 1.2%, which, let's be real, that's about $1.5 million roughly. What they could do, because we've used some reserves as well to bring it down to, in that first cut of 7, to get it down to 7.3 or whatever it was.
Can you flick to the next slide?
Sorry, I'm all over the place. with
No,
this
no,
sort of
it's
stuff.
fine.
So you could not use reserves, but then you've got a situation where we've collected money in the past and we're still not using it.
We haven't spent it.
So I think the use of reserves, even though it's a one-off lever that we're using this year, we can't use it again once the reserves are done. I think that's also probably a good faith thing with the ratepayers, that we have collected that in the past through whatever means we've collected it, be it rates or grants or whatever. We are now using it to keep the rate level down, which is probably what you should be thinking about. And I would suggest there's not a heck of a lot in the debt space. If you corral Three Waters and say that's moving off, then you don't have a lot of debt elsewhere that you would utilise that. Remember, that's a district-wide space as well. And the Cromwell Hall was designed to be repaid through the sale of endowment land at Bannockburn. So I don't think you can kind of mix, you can deal in those spaces. So I guess then are you going to increase your spending to keep your rate level up? And I don't think that that's actually prudent way to do it. I think if you've got a bunch of services that you are funding and you can fund them for 6.3% or whatever we've got it down to, that's what you run with. You then are looking good from the government's perspective. You're heading in the right direction. You're utilising your reserves that you've collected over many years. You're effectively leaving decisions you made on the table around Three Waters, funding depreciation, etc. Because as we've heard, to deliver more capital is going to be an issue anyway. So I think that you don't really have a lot of choice in what you do. If you were going to keep it at 7.5, there's not a lot of choices that you can make to utilise that. And I think that your ratepayers having, you've heard them. We had significant increase 2 years ago. We had nearly 12.5% last year. I'm struggling to see what we could use any additional money for that we hadn't already talked about with the ratepayers.
Yeah, and I guess the point that I still think is a lot of the savings that we've put in line are yet to come through to us, I guess, when they do come through and take the water, well, the water disappears, I guess. But I mean, we've done a lot of work. We've been trimming in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
That hasn't yet come into fruition as cost savings for us yet. That's what
I mean, as you can see on there, we've utilised just over $500,000 in reserves. That's just under 1%. So you could reverse those out, put them back, and increase rates by from 6.34 to 7.
And I guess
That would not be our advice.
No, absolutely not. I wouldn't advise that.
Well, what's the, with all this deferred capital works and legislation coming in to cap our rates at 4%, there's a big risk of a bow wave, isn't there?
You go for it.
So that capital, the food works largely around the wastewater.
Yeah.
Not the water. But it was what we couldn't get on because we were waiting for the government to release what the standards. So that's why.
So it's been deferred, yes.
But the rates cap doesn't include.
No, the race cap is completely separate from Three Waters.
Yeah.
So, and to be fair, the stuff that has been put out by the government is very, very light on detail or even how they haven't even got a formula. We did try and work out their formula, and it's not actually a formula. It's just some ideas. So we still don't know what that's going to look like. What we do know is, as Julie said, it does not include Three Waters. And I think that what we need to focus on is the go forward for this council. And if we can, as I say, we can bring the rates down to 6.3, it's heading in the right direction. It's coinciding also with our rates review.
so it's going to affect how it's made up. It'll be the same and made up the same. Could be just
average, it would. But if you're looking at a rates cap, for argument's sake, in terms of when we're doing our rates review, we're talking the average rates increase. So it's the number from last year in total, number from this year in total minus the number in last year in total divided by the number in last year in total. What they're saying is everybody's rates in terms of a rates cap will go up 4%. So your general rate factor changes by 4%. Your UAGC rates factor changes by 4%, will be between 2 and 4. Those types of things. So that whole average that we talk about is different. It's not necessarily going to be the same as what they're talking about.
4% can't work.
Well, as we said last time.
And then what penalty do we get from the government if we breach a 4%? What are they going to tell us? Oh,
I don't know yet.
We don't.
so therefore why are we worried about it? Because, well, it's a bit like saying if you do, you know, because we've still got to run a council, and a fast growing council, probably only one of the country that has grown at the speed that we are. And if you're ever going to have those discussions of saying, well, it might be 6 or it might be 6.8, we've got reasons why we're going to be there.
That's the problem. There's no detail. There's a growth component that may be added to some councils, but no steer on what that growth component might look like or what councils it will apply to. There's the ability to ask for an exemption to account for certain things, but there's no details on what the exemption might look like and how many councils might get it. It's just a figure thrown out into
For
the
nothing.
universe and nothing really behind it.
It's a bit
But
like a ball.
But
wouldn't
it is
Wasn't
an
it?
indication of that's what the government, both colours of government, because there's no indication that a Labour-led government would fit in this as well. If anything, they've kind of indicated they would probably continue.
It's the vote buying exercise for central government,
Yeah.
which is going to cost some of us around this table our positions in the next 3 years.
But I just, you know, I think we've come a long way in the last 10 or 15 years, this council, this community. And then all of a sudden, we get a popularity saying we're going to cut all the rates and cut all this. And what do we
I
be
don't
there?
think that is what we're saying, no.
Well, they're wanting this, the spend, or the exorbitant spend, which has all come through water. Mara Arrow, we're going to be talking this later on. The government regulate us into water. You have to do this pro reserve. That was where the cost came. If you took the rest of it, it wasn't in museums or sports fields or roads. It was just in the government transitioning into water for the last 10 years. Now that's gone.
Do you want to highlight on the next slide too, because I think those revaluations are going to have an impact on people as well.
Yes, so what the plan is to bring you what will be essentially the final budget for annual plan, the draft annual plan and fees and charges in March for that to be approved. And what that will allow is the LTP budgets to be opened. But between March and June, the revaluation process will take place, and that will impact the rates number looks like for each individual property. So while that takes place between April and June, the finance team will do their thing, and then we'll come back in June for the final adoption of the plan. So the plan will have remained the same from that March approval, but those rates numbers will be provided to you at that point to see what 6.3 or 7.3% increase looks like for each property example.
We are anticipating that people's valuations will not be going in a downwards trajectory, or are we?
In some cases, there are increases 6-7%. I'm not going, I can't tell you where because QV that they're dealing with that. There are some spaces that have shown very, very large increases. So it's there will be a shift of rates from one area to another.
Urban to rural?
No.
No, other way around, yes.
And it will be a shift of urban subset.
Yeah.
Right, so, and you'd expect that. I mean, where we're growing and where prices are being driven up, that's where it's going to move. So we thought that there was not a lot of point in giving you rates, and it's really on sample properties that we're talking about. Giving you that and then having to come back after a revaluation and saying, well, now this is moved because of these. So we think it's better that you get to see the complete, here's the average of 6.34. This is what it means to the sample properties given these fluctuations. And we have QV coming in March.
11th of March. so
11th
that
of
will
March to
be-
talk through that
Yeah.
process and what the answers are. So once we know what that looks like, we can then start modelling what it looks like on sample properties and giving the levers that you have to move UAGCs up or down, to move rates around like we did last time, whether we have as high a level of fixed rates in the community facility space or those types of things, we can look at that. So we'll be dealing with that in early March. You'll also have Steve Halliwell coming in on the 12th to talk you through the next stage of our rates review process. So we'll have some information that we can give, but we're still only using the old data for that because it won't be finalised by that time. So once we then get the new data, we'll shift everything into the new space and we'll treat it as if it was, you know, the new revaluations had occurred 12 months ago. So we can compare the movements and the impacts of movements rather than the increases in valuations, if that makes sense. So we will be doing, we'll have that for you.
Will you be speaking at the workshop?
QV are coming and speaking to the workshop. Yes, they'll be here. We have a pre-audit because they also have to be audited. So the audited Valuer General comes down and audits the work that QV have done. So they're here on the 23rd of February, I think. And they'll have 2 or 3 days in the district undertaking the audit, and then the thing gets finalised. I think it gets released early March between the 5th and the 12th. And that's when people start getting the valuation notices. And then you've got your month objection period. And that's why we can't do anything really until we know what objections have been received and dealt with. So it gives us April, May to finalise the rates, and then we can get the rates struck in the June meeting.
Are your predictions on the growth, are they still tracking as everyone's predicted, or is it slowed down and sped up?
We're after 321 new units, new rating units this year. We're at 88, but that's including the Christmas period. We kind of expect it to ramp up over. There's some significant stuff sitting in the.
Yeah, because I guess the only thing that trip a lot of the stuff up if the growth doesn't come as predicted.
Yep.
Because we had that presentation last night and the number of resource consents that we're seeing through is quite significant. So, you know, that's a lead indicator. So there's a lot going on.
I guess that, yeah, we're going to make sure that the growth does follow a track, even if it's 10%, 20% behind where we think. As long as it's on a trajectory for 20 years, everything else will sort itself out.
Yeah, I mean, we can't use that growth until 224C is issued because that's when titles are created. We can't do anything. We can't rate anything on a growth situation until the 224C is issued. But indications are that it's starting to, it's heading in the right direction. Whether we get to 2.1, yeah, it'll be close, I think.
Very good.
So I guess what we've got here in terms of the annual plan, if you look at it from the annual plan perspective, we have delivered an annual plan with a couple of exceptions as how you planned it in your LTP. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've delivered it cheaper than what you had in your LTP. So those two things by themselves we think don't trigger consultation requirements, because what we're aiming for here is to, because it was well put out in last year's long-term plan, this doesn't need to be consulted on. There are a couple of changes that we talked about at the prior to Christmas, but there we don't believe that they're significant in and of themselves. So we're predicting, I guess, a requirement not to. We don't need to consult. That then becomes a political call for the council if you want to consult. But our advice would be that you don't need to.
Make the savings, and we'll get no thanks to them either.
What would be the cost of a district-wide consultation, roughly?
We've allowed 10,000, I think, ask you for comms and the like. But I guess for us, it would be really difficult to have a look at, because when you go through a consultation process, it's a special consultative process. It's a consultation document that we would then all have to pull together to get approval to release. Then the comms teams gets involved and we do all that. So there's a direct cost of about 10K to do that, and that's the marketing and the like. Probably an indirect cost, or we've already pay those costs, but it means that we can't do a whole bunch of other stuff. Probably looking at 40 or 50,000 that the staff time involved in doing all of that. That's just an estimate. So we've already sunk that 50K into staff costs, but it means that we've got an opportunity cost to not do other stuff.
I think just to add to that as well, the risk around LTP timelines and the staff involvement in LTP from now onwards up to at least September, October is really critical. So to consult on this annual plan in the middle of what's going to be quite a critical time for that LTP will really stretch staff and will push back the LTP timelines that we've currently got in place.
And I'm happy to highlight that was discussed for those who went there at the audit and risk meeting the other day, that delivering an LTP that involves removing 30% of our work is already being monitored by audit and risk as a risk that we would not be able to deliver that aspect there. Recognising that there's not a requirement to consult on this annual plan, and that we have done it before. Was it 2020 that we went out with year 2 of the annual plan after the 2019? Anyone that was here? Anyone here in 2019 aside from?
It's pretty common. It's been done.
We have done it before where we just said, here's year 2. We're just going to do what we said we were going to do in year 2. And our outcry.
Why do you think we should?
I don't think we
No,
should.
no.
But it's a decision for everybody at this table to give a steer on should we.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that we would want to go out and consult?
Because you put out there, you had the reason why.
There are reasons why not. I can't think of any reasons why we should.
Well answered.
Well, I guess what we're asking is, in your reading over the break, was there anything in the draft that we hadn't thought about that you would think was a key consultation issue, something that you wanted to change in the annual plan draft to a different route?
Deviation from the LT.
It would have to be. And look, this is working as designed by the legislation. The legislation only really envisaged your big consultation at your long-term plan. Should do your planning for at least the first 3 years with quite a bit of rigor around it. And year 2 and year 3, we don't have year 2 and year 3 because of what we did, should just be slices that you can say, well, we've already talked about this. Here is the document that the program of work that we're sticking to.
The only things were if big things came in from the community that they really wanted to advance in the next 12 months. The only one I can think of that we've been approached about thus far is Molyneux Turf, potentially needing some more money, but both the discussions that I've had with them and the discussions that the VCB have had with them is that was a very unlikely scenario in the coming financial year, and that needed to think about what staging that project or looking for other avenues. Noting that we have already put some money in for it. Anything else that people have heard the community has a burning desire to spend a lot of money on that might trigger our consultation? I think I've given mostly firm no's on hydroslides for the pools at this point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah.
If you're wedgie, they're dangerous.
I think we've thrashed out a lot in the last 18 months.
Had quite a bit.
And those ones that are there are sort of always going to be on the edge of being there, and it's, we can do some of it out of reserves, or they can happen. We've done a pretty good job in the last 4 or 5 years to take the heat we've taken and get over the hump. Especially around the water work that's been done. The communities face it. They really, to be fair, in that community, like the rate rises, no one yet has complained about the price of the rates, what they get. As long as they get the services they get and continue to get them, they know that it's an outlier. So if we come out with a lesser number, they'll be pretty happy, I'm pretty sure. But the art is to make sure we get the right facilities, the right things done going into the future, because we do put the foot on the pedal after a change of government or things happen, we could go back to 7s and 8s or 9s to get stuff. So we've got to be careful. We're not just got a one-off that looks beautiful for the term, and really there's stuff we can keep pushing, or debt we can pay off. Pretty good result. In a lot of ways, because the work isn't being done, maybe a wish list is too big.
I think that we have the capability to do the work, and I think that what we've done is actually quite proven. You need to wait for the regulations, and
Which is the hard part.
historically we've overachieved in terms of capital spend in years. It's just we've got a changing landscape that we've got to kind of fit into.
Answer. Have you got a steer, do you think? Enough of a steer? Does anybody have any other questions? Because I've got something else that I'll touch on, but we'll finish this part first before.
Yeah, no, if what I'm understanding is the council they're happy with the rates number, they're happy with the annual plan, so we can finalise part of the document, bring it to council at the March council meeting for approval, and then it gets parked until June and the valuations, etc., come through. And then we just deal with rates in a June type time and get it sorted after that. That's what I'm getting.
Have you okay? Right, we've got our next session is joining the ORC at 11, but Paul, if you don't mind staying there. And Julie, if you don't mind joining, one of the things that has come in the last week, Peter and I have received emails because some are getting their first water bills under the new rate, and some of those have come as a substantial shock for some high water users, including the likes of some Aussie government facilities like schools. Not all of our schools are on water for irrigation purposes and the like, and we've had a couple of requests come through about what is this council's ability to discount water rates for high water users that are not commercial entities. So.
And just mindful,
Sorry to really interrupt, apologies. Just like to introduce you to Biddy, who was sitting in the last session. So Biddy's our new corporate planner, so you're going to be seeing lots of Biddy through the LTP. So I just wanted councillors to be aware who was in the room.
Welcome, Betty.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
and the other one is, can we touch on the multiplier without talking specifics about the rating units that were multiplied by 10? How?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, first of all, I'm surprised at the level of surprise because there was quite a lot of consultation around this, and as some of you will be aware, there was also a letter went out. So what happens is we don't read every meter on the 30th of June, so we can apply the new charge on the 1st of July. So there's 4 read rounds. We used to have 3 read rounds that got done twice a year. Workload was really lumpy. We've leveled it out. We've got 4 read rounds that now happens 3 times a year. So everyone gets the bill 3 months, every 4 months. No one had their meters read in July. We did 2 rounds in August. We were called up by August. So the properties that got done in August, had their last read at the 60 cents a cubic metre rate. And in that bill, there was a letter that outlined the fact that the next read was going to be at $1.60 a cubic metre. So that information got provided to everybody on their last 60 cents a cube. The ones that are coming in at the moment would probably have been the ones who were, you know, if you were unfortunate enough to have your meters read in August, you got the $1.60 applied from August, whereas if you go July, August, September, there would have been some reads in part of Cromwell that would have come in, didn't get their first read with a new rate until October. So I think it's probably the third read round that we're hearing about now, because they'll have now had their second bill for the year, which is now $1.60. So they were told 3 months ago that it was going to be going, that their next read would be at the higher rate. And we did, our comms around that wasn't perfect at the time because we got quite a bit of feedback around people thinking. So that I would say there has been some notification property to property around that. There are a lot of properties that use water for irrigation, bowling clubs, hospitals, a lot of organisations. So if you're looking to do remitting, this is going to get big, I would say. Part of the challenge in the past has been, and one of the reasons that for going for the higher uniform annual charge was that we were undervaluing the charge for water, and it didn't promote the right behaviours, and it didn't incentivise people to look at alternative options where they were using large amounts of irrigation water, because it was, and you know, we've had that conversation internally with our parks people. It was cheaper for them to continue to use treated water than it was for them to go put a capital investment into Singapore to get untreated water. So this was intentionally to try to change people's views to looking at other options for how they get that water.
And I know the club in Roxburgh are going to put a ball down for that reason.
Yeah, so that would be another one. They won't have done it just yet, probably. So
they're aware they got. So it does encourage behaviour change.
Yeah. So I'd say that any consideration around remitting probably needs to think about what the intent of this was. And if you remit, you would really want to come in with some really strong requirements around moving away from irrigating off that town supply. You know, when we presented the 10-year program to Council for Water, we had a bigger program that had more projects in it. We took a feedback from council and scaled that back, and at the time, I don't know if you remember, I very much remember putting it in the presentation that I said this program is dependent on reducing water consumption, otherwise we're going to have to pull forward growth projects. What we're actually seeing is growth happening faster as well, so that pressure on the use and ability to move water around the network is actually quite high. Really important we do get these reductions happening. Then I'll leave you to the legal bits around remitting.
Yeah.
How long would a remit policy transfer to the new?
I know you couldn't leave it long term, could you?
No.
Well,
No, in terms of it'll be up to the entity to do.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
So
we
any
can't-
decision we make would be very short-lived anyway.
No. Can you just talk about the 10 times multiplier?
okay, so then the other one that's come up is there's two types of meters that exist. There's one that you go out and you read it and there's a number on the dial, and that's the amount that you've used. And then for large supply, we'll be providing a bigger supply component because they're a larger consumer of water. The meter has the number and then it's got a little times 10 on it. So it's the decimal points in a different place on that meter. What appears to have happened in 2019, there was a change that occurred, and I'm not sure what that change was, but it could have been a couple of things. It could have been that there was a change in the person reading the meter, or it could have been a change in the person doing water billing. Somehow that times 10 didn't get picked up. And so those properties in 2019 then got 10 divided by 10 quantity of water charged from what they'd had previously. And that's gone
And
on.
you weren't on the phone telling us they owed us more money then.
And so, what happened is we bought meter reading in-house. We've got the new water meter readers. They've said, oh, hang on, there's these meters here. And we've said, oh, yes, that means this is the unit. The unit's been being misreported in the billing. So they've had 6 years effectively of a reduced water charge going on. Unfortunately,
Between one bill and another back in 2019, it all of a sudden was 1/10 of what they were usually paying, and none of them thought to call us and say, why am I only charged 1/10 of what I usually pay?
that's what, look, I haven't got all the numbers lined up yet, but that's what would appear to have been the case. Of course, what's happened now is picked up the error at the same time as the water charge has increased.
So
And so
it's
they have,
400 times.
I've got to say, probably have a bit more of an empathy for those properties because they have had a sudden shock that they weren't anticipating.
You couldn't write
But,
it.
you know, there was that, it did go down and nobody at that point said, oh, hey, is there a mistake here?
For the council to consider that though, is still, it's not a staff decision, and do we have a policy to consider that?
I just, do we know how many properties?
It's
there's
two,
Two.
yeah. And so will I tell you what two they are?
Well, we know one's
two that we're
commercial
talking
and
about.
one's a charitable trust.
You can demonstrate with your data that they were at this volume and then it dropped like.
Yeah,
Like
but
that-
of course that drop at 60 cents a cube
Yeah.
was quite different to
Yeah, yeah, I
that
know.
going up at $1.60 a cube. So,
But in terms of taking them on the journey, you can.
yeah,
They're both high.
Still going to hurt.
well, that's why they had that different kind of meter.
Why do we have meters with the tiny little times 10 in the corner? Why do we make our lives so
Once we have more the data, some information will go back to those two groups. And I think the charitable trust might approach council, and I'm not going to do that. But we don't have the authority vested in us to waive bills because, you know, at schools and all that sort of stuff, we don't charge them rates, but we charge them for consumption.
So there's another one in the background as well that might not be aware of, Tana. We have a bulk water rate. So what that is there's some properties in the district who don't get water supplied to their gate by council. It's supplied to a point, and then they have a private water supply. They have a private reticulation network. So they buy that water from council at a point in the network and then reticulate it to their properties. When the volumetric charge got changed, and I'm not too sure how it came about, so that bulk water rate, they don't pay a uniform annual charge. So the bulk water rate is at a higher rate to reflect the fact that they don't pay a UAC charge as well. It's also used for filling tankers and that sort of thing from fill points. They pay a higher charge because they're not paying the UAC component. Somehow, look, I'm not aware of actually us sitting down and having considered this because I would have been aware that there was a risk here because previously we increased the bulk water rate to reflect the fact that they weren't paying the UAC, and you might remember I've been here a while. To be honest, there was a quite an uproar, and council effectively went back and reduced it somewhat for that because that increase was a shock to them because it's in the fees and charges. It's not a specific consultation item. It got increased by a factor of 4. And I think what might have happened is someone within the organisations looked and said, we're going from 60 cents a cube to 2.40 for the volumetric charge. So we'll increase the bulk charge by 4 times. Of course, it was around $1, I think.
Yeah.
So it's gone up to $4. So we're probably going to need to bring back a report where we calculate out to be, because there's 2 that I'm aware of that where residential properties get supplied, and one of those have come back and said, hey, what's this about?
And they're both overseen by Body Corp. The one is.
Yeah. The 2 I know of are Body Corps.
Yeah.
There was one that we were doing that's for an area in Cromwell, which they got a bulk supply for irrigation. And I met with those people years ago and said, look, you do need to, when the first bulk water charge impacted them, I said, you really need to think about getting this off town supply because the charge will go up and you will be paying.
And town supply years ago, you'll remember it, Mini Toto, There were people K-lining in the town supply.
Yeah, I think there's still a couple of properties out there that I think still do.
What's that?
I suspect there's still one that does.
It must be awesome pressure.
They'll be changing, they might be revisiting their.
Yeah, yeah.
application.
They won't get caught in this next round.
So remitting, do you want to?
Yeah, we don't really have any policy around being able to do that. Our remission for water is for leaks. We do not allow remission for irrigation. And if you remember, there was there was an application, they'd spent $8,000 extra on water due to leaks, but again, it was a leak. It wasn't what we're talking about here, an issue with the multiplier charging that. So yeah, we would have to, if there was a request for consideration of remission, that would be a bespoke solution for a particular party. But since we don't have any remission policy specific to that, I would suggest that the intention is it is what it is in terms of charging. So yeah.
And it's not all for irrigation, but they are high.
Yeah.
That's why their bills are high. Typically, those the one.
Yeah, we had one a while ago. We thought we had a remission in Ramsville, and the powers that be again changed it back. So it was a genuine one where a person had done water drainage in a frost area, and then they had a stroke. And it was a charitable organisation. They came back and they'd used, when the frost had gone off, they turned the water on and it was all. I don't think
I know through the consultation there were organisations that were raising the fact that they were going to be quite impacted, and bowling clubs were ones that came up. There was one they talked to us in Ranfurly about that. I know the Clyde one's another one. Looking at their options there.
Is there an appetite to have something come as a report to council, recognising that we've got very limited options, or do you want this to be dealt with by Peter and myself, which is effectively this is what it is. Our intention was for people to use less water. Some people have been captured by this more than others.
Probably that's where you leave it.
Once we have the numbers, too, we'll be able to pin that to say, look, actually, over the last 7 years, you've been effectively receiving a 90% discount for consumption.
I think the other thing that you need to consider is that, okay, these are by user exceptions, but there are other people who have gone from 60 cents to $1.60 in terms of their ability to pay and have paid it. If you deal with that exception, are you then opening up yourselves up to everybody else who didn't agree with the dollar increase to say, well, they've got it, shouldn't we have it? And that kind of, given that we have gone out and I think that we've done a good job letting people know prior to the long-term plan, throughout the consultation period, what was coming. We did give them time to try and mitigate what was going to happen. And I just worry that if you consider remissions for these particular groups, then I would struggle to argue if anybody else came in and said, well, it's too high for me as well.
I think just to be aware too, it's going to go from $1.60 to $2.40.
Yeah.
Like, well, of course, it'll be 3 months and before they get all the 4 months before we get everybody on transitioned across to $2.40 again.
There was some dead grass.
Right. Okay. We are back in here, just going to take a quick break if anybody needs to get a cup of tea or coffee or anything like that. 11 o'clock. I'll ask question.